Hmm. She said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. Oh good, the grease man finally showed up. Her voice cut right through the chatter of the restaurant like a knife dragging across a plate. A few heads turned. Someone near the window pretended to adjust their napkin. My daughter-in-law-to-be, Vivian Holt, stood near the hostess stand in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my truck payment, her lips curled into something she'd dressed up as a smile. She was speaking to her mother, but she wasn't whispering. She never whispered when she wanted to be heard. I stopped walking. My hand tightened around the small wrapped gift I'd brought. A cast-iron skillet, the good kind, 30 years old, seasoned perfect. Something I thought a new household could use. Now it felt ridiculous in my hands. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 67 years old. I've run a woodworking shop out of Harlan County, Kentucky for 31 years. The same shop my father opened in 1961 and left to me when his hands gave out. I make furniture. Real furniture. The kind that outlasts the people who buy it. The kind that outlasts the people who buy it. The kind that ends up passed down instead of thrown out. I've never been a wealthy man, but I've never owed anyone anything either. And I raised my son Daniel on those two facts like they were scripture. That evening was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel, my son, 34 years old, brilliant and steady as a fence post in winter, had proposed to Vivian Holt 3 weeks earlier. Her parents had suggested this dinner. A formal introduction, they called it. A chance for both families to sit together and welcome the union. I'd put on my good flannel. I'd polished my boots. I'd driven 2 hours from Harlan to Lexington with a gift and a full heart. And I heard her before I even reached the table. Before I could process what to do with my face, I felt a hand grip my elbow from behind. Daniel. He'd seen everything. His jaw was set in that particular way he has, tight but controlled, the way he looked when he was doing long math problems as a kid and didn't want anyone to know he was struggling. Dad. His voice was low, steady. Don't go anywhere. I need you right here tonight. I looked at him. Son, I don't think. I know what you heard. He leaned in, just close enough that no one else could catch it. And I promise you, by the end of this week, she's going to wish she never said it. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment, something colder and more deliberate than either. I didn't understand it then, but I knew my son. I'd watched him grow from a boy who cried when his dog died to a man who handled hard things quietly and handled them right. So I nodded. I followed him to the table. I sat across from Gerald and Patricia Holt and smiled the smile of a man swallowing a fire. Let me tell you about Gerald Holt. He's the kind of man who uses the word investment as a verb. He shakes your hand like he's evaluating the grip, not returning it. That first dinner he asked me 3 times, not twice. 3 what the assessed value of my property was. Not what I did, not what I loved about the work. The assessed value, like I was a portfolio entry he was considering. My shop sits on 4 acres at the edge of town. I own the land outright, inherited it, maintained it, expanded the building twice. There's also the house, the same house where Daniel grew up, where my wife Margaret made Sunday dinners until the cancer took her 5 years ago. It isn't much by Lexington standards. By Harlan County standards, it's everything. Margaret, God, I miss her. She had a way of reading people in the first 5 minutes that took me 5 months to catch up to. She would have seen Vivian coming from the parking lot. She would have touched my arm in that quiet way she had and said, Walter, something's off about that girl. And I would have listened, because I always listened to Margaret. Because she was almost never wrong. I should have trusted my instincts. They were whispering the same thing Margaret would have said. But Daniel was happy, genuinely happy, the kind I hadn't seen in him since before his mother passed. And I told myself maybe I was just an old man looking for reasons to hold on to my son. I told myself that for 8 months. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel called, his voice different from his usual tone. Not distressed, but deliberate. The way he sounds when he's already made up his mind about something and is calling to explain the reasoning. Dad, I need you to come to Lexington. Today if you can. Don't tell anyone you're coming. I left within the hour. When I got to his apartment, there was a young woman I didn't recognize sitting at his kitchen table with a laptop open and a yellow legal pad covered in neat handwriting beside it. Daniel introduced her as Carrie Sutton, She was composed, professional, somewhere around 30, with the kind of focused stillness that made me think she didn't waste words. "Carrie's a paralegal," Daniel said. "She's been helping me understand what we're looking at." "What are we looking at?" I asked. Daniel sat down across from me. He folded his hands the way he does when he's about to say something that matters. "Dad, for the past 6 weeks I've been recording conversations. Mine and Vivian's. Mine and Gerald's. All of them legal. Kentucky is a one-party consent state, which Carrie confirmed. I was present in every conversation. Every recording is admissible." My stomach dropped slowly, the way it does when you realize you already knew something and have been refusing to name it. "Play them," I said. He did. The first recording was Gerald. His voice was relaxed, comfortable, the voice of a man who believed he was speaking in complete privacy. "The Briggs property is the piece," he said. 4 acres inside county limits, plus the structure. Assessed at $340,000, but that's before the commercial rezoning goes through. You understand what that means, Vivian. Once that zoning flips, we're looking at easily $1.2 million. Maybe more, depending on who bids. Vivian's voice, amused and breezy. Daniel has no idea any of this is even in motion. He doesn't need to. He just needs to say, "I do," and sign where we tell him. Once a property transfers as part of the marital estate restructuring, we move fast. We've done this before. The old man will be confused for long enough that by the time he understands what happened, it'll be recorded and filed. I sat very still. My hands were flat on the table. I was aware of the sound of my own breathing. Daniel reached over and pressed play on the second file without looking at me. He already knew what was on it. He was watching my face. Vivian's voice this time, sharper, less performance in it. "He makes furniture, Mother. He smells like sawdust and linseed oil, and he showed up to the gravestone in a flannel shirt. This is temporary. 2 years, maybe 18 months if we can accelerate the transfer. Then we file, we settle. Daniel gets his half of nothing because there's no prenuptial protecting him, and we walk away with the land and the rezoning profit. Dad already has the development group lined up." A pause, then her mother's voice, the one that had been all warmth and manners at every family dinner. And Daniel truly has no idea. Vivian laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was worse. It was indifferent. "He thinks I love him. Isn't that something?" I heard that laugh and understood for the first time in months why my hands had never fully relaxed at any dinner table where Vivian Holt was sitting across from me. Carrie spoke carefully. "Mr. Briggs, what they're describing, the forced marital estate transfer, the timed property restructuring, it crosses into fraud. Specifically deed fraud and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, which in Kentucky carries additional weight because of your age and the asset value involved." "What does that mean in plain language?" I asked. "It means if they execute this plan, they commit multiple felonies, and what Daniel has recorded is enough to tape to the county attorney's office today." I looked at my son. He was watching me with that same contained expression from the restaurant, not asking for permission, not waiting for rescue. Just waiting for me to catch up to where he already was. "How long have you known?" I asked him. "I suspected around month 3, he said quietly. "The question she asked about your property, the way her father watched you at the 4th of July cookout, like he was doing inventory, I didn't want it to be true. I kept hoping I was wrong." He paused. "I wasn't wrong. Son." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I'm sorry I didn't, Dad." He stopped me. "You raised me to look for the truth and not flinch from it. That's what I did. That's all I did." I couldn't say anything else for a moment. I just nodded. That night, alone in the guest room of Daniel's apartment, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back in the dark and I talked to Margaret. I do this sometimes, in the hardest moments, when I need to hear the steady cadence of reasoning through a problem the way she and I used to do together over coffee at the kitchen table. "We're going to lose the shop if we don't get this right," I told the dark. I could almost hear her. "You're not going to lose it, Walter. You didn't build that shop to lose it to someone who never touched a piece of wood in her life. Daniel found it before it happened. He protected us." She would have smiled at that. "She always knew he would. I just wish you were here to see what he's become." The ceiling didn't answer. But I felt the same thing I always feel in those conversations. A quieting. a steadiness returning to my chest. I closed my eyes, and for the first time that week, I slept. The next morning, Daniel and I drove to the county attorney's office together. Carrie had already prepared a summary document. The recordings were transferred to a secured drive and authenticated by a sound technician Daniel had contacted through his firm. He works in civil engineering, meticulous by nature, careful with evidence the way he's careful with blueprints. The county attorney, a trim, precise woman named Sharon Graves, listened to the relevant recordings twice without expression. Then she asked 3 questions, all of them direct. Then she thanked us for coming in. She said she'd be in contact within 48 hours. She called back in 31. Now here is the part I'll tell you carefully, because it matters how it happened. Vivian and Gerald had no idea any of this was in motion. As far as they knew, the wedding planning was on schedule, a late spring ceremony at a venue in Lexington that the Holts had largely selected and were happy to fund, because the wedding, I now understood, was never the point. The wedding was the mechanism. Daniel continued as normal. He answered Vivian's texts. He showed up to the venue walkthrough. He smiled the smile of a man who was still planning a future with her, because he needed them to believe that right up until the moment the ground disappeared from under them. I'll tell you, it cost him something to do that. I watched my son perform normalcy for 3 weeks while carrying the weight of what he knew, and I understood for the first time how much of his mother's particular kind of strength had passed directly into him. The closing dinner was Gerald's idea. He suggested it 2 weeks before the wedding, a private family dinner at the Holts' home in Lexington. A chance, he said, to review some of the property and estate matters that would smooth the transition once the 2 families were officially joined. He framed it as thoughtful planning. He handed Daniel a folder of documents at the table, transfer agreements, and joint asset filings, the legal architecture of the plan they'd been constructing for over a year. Daniel took the folder. He thanked Gerald. He said he'd have his attorney review everything before signing. Gerald's smile flickered the way a candle does in a draft. "Of course," he said. "Of course, that's the prudent thing." What Gerald didn't know was that Sharon Graves' office had been briefed on the timing. What Gerald didn't know was that 2 investigators were parked half a block from the house. What Gerald didn't know was that the documents in that folder, which Carrie's team had already obtained copies of through a parallel civil process, contained the forged preliminary signatures that constituted a separate charge. Gerald found out all of this approximately 14 minutes after he handed my son the folder. The knock at the door was courteous and unhurried. When Vivian opened it and saw Sharon Graves standing on the front step with her identification and 2 officers behind her, she went completely still, not the composed stillness of someone in control, the stillness of someone whose mind has just run into a wall at full speed. "Vivian Holt and Gerald Holt," Sharon said. "I need you both to come with me. You are being detained in connection with charges of conspiracy to commit deed fraud, conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, and possession of forged instruments." Gerald stood up from the dining room table and started talking immediately. "This is a misunderstanding. These are private family financial discussions. You have no basis," one of the officers said. "Mr. Holt, you can continue that conversation with your attorney." Vivian said nothing. She looked at Daniel, and for just a moment, one small, unguarded moment, I saw something real in her face. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to disbelief. Like she genuinely had not believed this outcome was possible. Daniel looked back at her evenly. He didn't look angry. He looked sad the way you look sad when you confirm something you'd hoped to be wrong about. Patricia Holt began to cry at the table. A thin, bewildered crying, and I found I had no feeling about that one way or another. I looked at my son instead. He was watching the officers with the focused calm of a man who had done everything correctly and knew it. The charges were filed the following week. A criminal attorney representing Gerald attempted to reframe the recordings as entrapment, which the county attorney's office addressed swiftly. Daniel had been a direct participant in every recorded conversation, and the content was both authentic and legally obtained. A civil suit ran parallel to the criminal proceeding, targeting the fraudulent instruments in the development group that Gerald had already partially contracted with. Under the assumption that the land transfer would succeed, Carrie's work on the documentation was precise and thorough, and the civil process moved faster than I expected. 2 months later, I sat in a wood-paneled courtroom in Lexington, Kentucky, wearing the same suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral, the only formal suit I own. I sat beside Daniel and across from two people who had looked at my life's work, at the shop my father built, at the house where I raised my son, and seen nothing but a dollar figure with an aging man attached to it. The jury took just under 5 hours. Gerald Holt, guilty on all counts. 18 months federal. 3 years supervised release. Full restitution ordered. Vivian Holt, guilty on conspiracy and possession of forged instruments. 12 months, with the balance suspended pending restitution and compliance. When the judge read the verdicts, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I'd braced for some rush of satisfaction or relief. What came instead was quieter, a release of pressure, the way a joint aches less when the weather finally breaks. The threat was real, and now the threat was done. That was all. Outside the courthouse, Daniel and I stood in the April sunlight. He'd loosened his tie. I had mine fully off and in my jacket pocket, which is where ties belong, as fast as possible, after an occasion that requires them. "You doing all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I am." He nodded. We stood there a minute without talking, which is one of the things I love about my son. He knows how to stand in a quiet moment without filling it. Carrie thinks there may be 2 other families who were approached by Gerald with the same framework, Daniel said eventually. Different states. She's helping connect them with the right legal contacts. I looked at him. Good. He glanced over. "You're not surprised." "Vivian's recording said they'd done it before," I said. "Some things you hear and you don't forget." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I almost didn't record them, First time I had the chance. It was a phone call with Gerald. Early on, I almost let it go. I thought maybe I was being paranoid." "What made you go ahead?" He thought about it. "Mom," he said simply. "I kept thinking about what she'd say if she were here, and I knew she'd tell me to get the truth in writing." I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small and exhausted and needed to be steadied. He let me. "She'd have been proud of you," I said. "She is proud of you." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The summer that followed was the best one I'd had in years. Daniel requested a transfer to his firm's satellite office in Lexington, close enough to drive to Harlan on weekends. He started coming to the shop on Saturday mornings. At first, he'd just drink coffee and watch me work, the way he did as a kid, sitting on the old step stool in the corner, asking questions about joinery and grain direction. Then he started picking up tools again. He was rusty at first, which he knew and didn't mind. He broke 2 chisels getting reacquainted with the pressure angles. I didn't say anything. You don't rush a person back to the work. You let the work pull them in on its own schedule. By August, he was building a credenza, his own design, a little ambitious for where his skills were, but not beyond him. I watched him work through the problems on his own and offered nothing unless he asked. He asked the right questions. He'd always ask the right questions. Carrie came by the shop one Saturday in September, technically to drop off some finalized paperwork related to the civil settlement. She stayed for 4 hours. She looked at the chairs along the east wall like someone who actually saw them. She asked about the wood. She asked about the joinery. She asked good questions, the kind that come from genuine curiosity rather than politeness. I noticed Daniel watching her when she wasn't looking. I noticed he straightened up a little when she directed a question at him. I noticed he laughed more easily that afternoon than he had in the 2 years I'd known Vivian to exist. I didn't say anything. I made coffee and stayed out of the way. By October, they were having dinner together most Fridays. By December, she'd been to the shop enough times that she had a preferred mug and knew not to move the mortise gauge off the second shelf. Daniel told me about them as a couple on a quiet Sunday afternoon, carefully, the way he delivers any significant piece of information. Measured, direct, not performing casualness. "I know it's soon," he started. "It's not soon," I said. "It's right. There's a difference." He looked at me. "You knew." "I'm old," I said. "Not blind." He smiled. It was a good smile, the unguarded kind. The kind he had as a little boy before he learned to be careful with things. I hadn't seen it enough in recent years. They were married the following spring, not in a rented venue with crystal chandeliers. In the yard behind the shop, under the white oak that's been there longer than any of us. On a warm Saturday in May, when the light comes in low and gold off the hills and everything smells like cut grass and sawdust. About 40 people, real food, real conversation. Daniel's best friend from college playing guitar on the porch. Carrie wore her mother's earrings. Daniel wore the same shirt he'd worn to his mother's favorite restaurant the last time she was well enough to go. I walked him out to the yard before the ceremony. We stood there together for a moment looking at the people gathered, the neighbors, the friends, the small true circle of a life honestly lived. "You good?" I asked him. "Better than good," he said. I believed him. The shop is different now. Quieter in some ways, busier in others. Daniel is in on most Saturdays, more skilled now than he gives himself credit for. Carrie has taken to finishing work with a patience and precision that surprised us both. She has the hands for it, as it turns out. Steady and deliberate, good with fine detail. She's been learning to do the hand-cut dovetails that I've been doing for 30 years, and she does them without cursing, which puts her ahead of where I was at her stage. I still talk to Margaret, not every night now, but in the moments when it matters. I told her about the trial. I told her about Carrie. I told her about the Saturday in July when Daniel finished the credenza and stood back and looked at it the way you look at something you made with your own hands. A particular kind of looking that you can't fake and you can't teach. I told her, "Your son is okay. He's better than okay. He found the truth, and he didn't flinch from it, and then he built something after." That's the whole story. That's what happened to Walter Briggs of Harlan County, Kentucky, who built furniture for 31 years and nearly lost it all to people who saw his life's work as a transaction. 3 things I want to leave you with, because they matter. First, if someone makes you feel like your dignity is something they're tolerating rather than something they respect, trust that feeling. Trust it early. I didn't, and it cost us months of exposure and risk. Your instincts are built from everything you've ever survived. They deserve to be taken seriously. Second, the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who ask about what you love, not what you own. Every question Gerald and Vivian asked in those first 8 months was about property and value and transfer. Not one question about the wood. Not one question about my father or my wife or what 31 years of this work had meant. They were never interested in any of us. They were interested in the land under the building. Pay attention to the questions people ask. They tell you everything. Third, I've learned that justice is slower and less dramatic than we want it to be. But it still comes. You have to document. You have to be patient. You have to let the evidence do the work you'd rather do with your fists. Daniel understood that. It saved us. My son is in the shop right now. I can hear him working the hand plane across the credenza he's starting for a client in Harlan. Long, clean strokes, getting the rhythm. There's coffee on the burner. The hills outside are going gold in the late afternoon. The shop smells the way it's always smelled. Sawdust and linseed oil and honest work. Someone once said that smell was a reason to look down on me. I've thought about that a few times since. Not with anger anymore. Just with a kind of quiet certainty. There are worse things to smell like than the work of your life. That's my story. And if something in it sounds like yours, if you felt that tightening in your gut at a dinner table, that nagging instinct you talked yourself out of, I hope you trust it sooner than I did. I hope you have someone like Daniel in your corner. And if you don't, I hope you become someone like Daniel for the people who need you. That's all I've got. Take care of each other out there.